the American wild Mustang, revered for its beauty, power, independent spirit, and will to survive in the harshest of habitats, protected, like the bald eagle, as a symbol of freedom and living embodiment of the spirit of the West, but caught in the crossfire of a struggle for the future of America's public lands. The horse has been called North America's gift to the world. The species evolved on the continent and persisted for millions of years before going extinct only thousands of years ago. Dr. Beth Shapiro, an evolutionary molecular biologist with the University of California, Santa Cruz, leads the Original Horse Project, which aims to understand the evolutionary history of horses.
We've discovered that horses moved across the Bering Land Bridge, which connected North America and Asia, during glacial periods when the sea level across the world was quite a lot lower than it is today, which exposed a land bridge connecting these two continents. Every time there was a land bridge, horses would move across from North America into Siberia and from Siberia back into North America. When horses went extinct 12,000 years ago, they were locally extinct, but they were not globally extinct. When Europeans brought them back to North America several hundred years ago, that was simply reintroducing a native species to the North American continent.
The wild herds that grace the land today are descendants of the horses brought back to American shores by the Spanish beginning in the early 1500s. Returned to the land where they evolved, the horses thrived. But by the 1950s, their populations had declined dramatically to less than 25,000 due to Mustangers, ranchers and cowboys who cleared the land of wild horses for their livestock by cruelly killing or capturing them for slaughter. The brutality of this practice galvanized public outrage and led to the passage of the Wild Free-Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971. The law declared these animals to be living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West. It was unanimously passed by Congress, which considered the animals to be fast disappearing and aimed to protect them from capture, branding, harassment, or death. Today, wild horses and burros live on 27 million acres spread across 10 western states, with the largest horse populations residing in Nevada. Most are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, an agency under the U.S. Department of the Interior, and live in designated habitats on public lands called herd management areas, which are located in some of the most remote and rugged lands in the country. Wild horses live in complex and dynamic social structures known as bands that average between 5 to 12 animals. A band consists of a stallion, the male, a lead mare, the dominant female, and several other mares and their offspring. When the male offspring reach their teenage years, the lead stallion will usher them out of the herd to begin the journey of finding their own families. Typically, these youngsters form what is known as bachelor bands, groups of male horses that live and spar together until they are mature enough to find their own mates. Wild horses can travel up to 20 miles a day in search of food and water. As prey animals, they do not remain in one area except for periods of rest. Unlike cattle, which congregate in riparian areas, wild horses trail in and out of water, with bands taking turns getting a drink before moving off. Studies have shown that horses spread native plant seeds as they move across the landscape, and their impacts on the land are primarily limited to trailing. Despite federal protections, the future for America's wild horses is anything but assured. Caught in a struggle for control of resources on Western public lands, they face near eradication under a government program that rounds them up by the thousands each year to make room for commercial livestock grazing. Captured wild horses and burros are loaded onto trailers and transported to tax-funded holding facilities where these once wild animals are confined to feedlot corrals, or worse, end up in the slaughter pipeline. Polls show that the vast majority of Americans want wild horses protected on our Western public lands. But the federal government, under pressure from the powerful beef industry, is on a course to destroy America's wild herds. In 1971, wild horses were fast disappearing from the American West, and it took an uprising by the American people to save them. 51 years later, wild horses are again on the precipice, and the power of the people is needed for their protection. In his signing statement of the 1971 law, President Richard Nixon was quoted as saying, Wild horses and burros merit man's protection as a matter of ecological right, as anyone knows who has ever stood awed at the indomitable spirit and sheer energy of a Mustang running free. Catching a glimpse of wild horses experiencing freedom will take your breath away. They are deeply entwined with the history and culture of this nation and an integral part of the Western landscapes where they roam. In a world where so much that is wild has been lost, there is still a corner of the West where wild horses run free. It's worth fighting for. Join us to conserve these national treasures. Their future is in our hands.